Your brother invited 25 guests. You'll cook and serve them all.
Of course, Dad. But by Christmas morning, I'll be in Hawaii.
My name is Simone Brandt, and last Christmas my father gave me an order he thought I would obey without question. My brother Troy had invited 25 people to our parents' house. Dad expected me to buy the groceries, cook the meal, set the tables, serve every guest, and wash every dish afterward. I had done exactly that for 12 years, so I looked at my father, smiled, and said, "Of course. I'll handle everything." Then, while my family slept, I drove to the airport and flew to Maui. What happened when those 25 guests arrived at an empty kitchen finally exposed a family secret that had lasted for 3 generations. I was 31 and lived alone in a quiet apartment in Maplewood, Ohio, about 40 minutes from my parents. I worked as a bookkeeper during the week and ran a small catering business with my friend Nora on evenings and weekends. We called it Brandt Kitchen. It had started with birthday dinners and meal prep orders for neighbors. By that winter, we had regular business clients and several large events on our calendar. Nora managed deliveries and staffing. I handled the cooking and accounts. For the first time in my life, cooking belonged to me. It was no longer just a duty assigned by my family. It was a skill, a profession, and something I had built for myself. But every holiday, the old rules returned. My father, Ray, was 63 and had not prepared a meal since before I was born. He was a retired warehouse supervisor who still spoke, as if everyone around him worked on his shift. My mother, Deborah, had spent 30 years working in an elementary school cafeteria. After serving food all day, she came home and served her family. Her hands were swollen with arthritis, yet she never complained. Then there was Troy, my 34-year-old brother. He sold cars, lived rent-free in our parents' basement, and spent most of his money on his truck, clothes, and nights out. Troy had never cooked a holiday meal. He had never washed the dishes after one either. In our family, the son was treated like the future. The daughter was treated like the kitchen. I was 14 when my grandmother June taught me to make her pecan pie. As she guided my hands over the dough, Dad walked through the kitchen and said, "Good. Now Simone can handle Thanksgiving by herself." Grandma's hands stopped for a moment, but she said nothing. That year, I cooked my first holiday meal. Troy played video games upstairs while I peeled potatoes and basted the turkey. Nothing changed as we grew older. In fact, my family began depending on me for much more than food. 3 years before that Christmas, Dad fell behind on the property taxes. The county threatened to seize the house unless he paid $14,000. I took out a personal loan and cleared the debt. When the furnace failed, I paid $6,800 for a replacement. When the roof leaked into Troy's basement, I paid another $11,000. Altogether, I had spent $31,800 keeping my parents' house standing. No one had repaid me. Most of the family did not even know. Still, whenever Dad called, I came. 5 weeks before Christmas, I prepared Thanksgiving dinner for 14 people. I began cooking at 6 in the morning. By noon, the house smelled of sage, brown butter, roasted turkey, and pecan pie. My back ached, and my hands were burned from hot pans. Troy arrived late, filled his plate before everyone had sat down, and took the last slice of pecan pie without asking. Then Dad raised his glass and thanked everyone for coming to our home. He did not mention the 12 hours I had spent cooking. After dinner, Mom and I washed dishes for 2 hours. Her red, swollen fingers trembled in the hot water. "Troy could help," I said. Mom glanced toward the basement and whispered, "You know how he is." I did know, and I was finally beginning to understand that nothing would change while I continued making his behavior comfortable. On December 22nd, I was at my parents' house helping Mom wrap gifts. Troy had bought himself an expensive jacket and asked her to wrap it so it would look like a present. She did it without blinking. Dad entered the dining room with Troy behind him. Both were smiling. "Mona?" Dad said, using the childhood nickname I hated. "Your brother's friends are spending Christmas here." I set down the ribbon. "How many friends?" "About 25. Troy answered. "Maybe a few more." Dad clapped his hands once. "It's only 25 people only. And who is cooking?" I asked. Dad looked amused by the question. "Come on, Mona. You've done this 100 times. Troy explained that his girlfriend, Melanie, was coming with her parents. The Hardings owned a respected insurance agency in town, and Troy wanted to impress them. "Melanie's mother is gluten-free," he said, reading from his phone. "Her father can't eat shellfish, and her sister is vegan. I'll send you the full list." My phone buzzed in my pocket. "What are you contributing?" I asked. Troy spread his arms as if he owned the place. "I'm providing the venue." The venue was the house my money had saved. I looked at Dad. Then I looked at Troy. And I smiled. "Sure," I said. "I'll handle it." "That's my girl," dadding my shoulder. That evening, while Mom studied recipes and Dad watched television, I searched for flights to Hawaii. Mom leaned toward me. I was thinking turkey and ham this year. Your grandmother always served both when we had more than 20 guests. Why can't Troy prepare some of it? She lowered her voice. Your brother isn't kitchen people. Kitchen people. As if some of us were born to serve while everyone else was born to sit down. From his recliner, Dad called, "Family comes first, Mona." I stared at him and thought about the tax bill, the furnace, the roof, and every unpaid hour I had spent in that kitchen. When had I ever come first to my family? Later that night, I heard Troy talking to a friend in the hallway. "Don't bring anything," he said. "My sister handles all that. She loves cooking." He laughed, and something inside me became completely still. I opened my laptop and booked a flight from Columbus to Maui, departing late on Christmas Eve. The following afternoon, Dad sent me to the attic for Grandma June's roasting pans. Behind a stack of old boxes, I found a rusted green tin. Inside it was a small notebook held closed by a brittle rubber band. The first page was written in Grandma's careful handwriting. Every line recorded a holiday, the number of guests, the dishes she prepared and what the meal had cost her. Thanksgiving 1972, 18 guests, Christmas 1985, 22 guests, Easter 1998, 14 guests. The entries continued for 36 years. In one margin, she had written, "Ray did not enter the kitchen once." At the bottom of the final page were 5 words. 187 meals. No one ever asked how much. I sat on the attic floor with the notebook in my lap. Grandma June had counted because no one else had. She had recorded the money, the hours, and the guests so there would be proof that her work had existed. My grandmother counted. My mother endured. And I had repeated their lives so faithfully that my brother believed serving him was what made me happy. I placed the notebook in my bag and carried the roasting pans downstairs. Mom was peeling potatoes at the kitchen table. Her fingers shook each time she gripped the peeler. I loved her. But in that moment I made myself a promise. I would not become her. That night I heard Troy talking to Melanie on a video call. "My sister does everything," he said. "Cooking, serving, cleaning. She's basically our maid, except she doesn't charge." Melanie laughed softly. I was standing in the grocery list in my hand. I calmly tore it in half and dropped it into the trash. A maid earned money. A maid had working hours. A maid had the right to quit. So I quit. I called my Aunt Ruth, Dad's older sister. She had left home at 19 and built a successful bed and breakfast. She was the only woman in our family who had escaped the kitchen before it could become her entire identity. I told her everything, including what Troy had called me. After a long silence, she said, "Your grandmother would have walked away 30 years ago if she had somewhere to go." "I have somewhere to go," I replied. "Maui." "Good, you go." "I'll be at Christmas dinner as usual." "What are you going to do?" "Nothing dramatic," she said. "I'm simply going to make sure everyone sees the truth." Then she added, "In this family, the women count and the men spend. It is time to change the math." At 10 that night, my parents were asleep and Troy was in the basement. Honora quietly arrived with her van and removed every piece of catering equipment stored in the garage. The chafing dishes, baking trays, serving containers, industrial mixer, and carving station all belonged to our business. Then I canceled the wholesale grocery order I had placed through Brandt Kitchen. Without it, my parents had enough food for perhaps 4 people. Finally, I wrote Dad a short letter. "I have cooked 144 holiday meals for this family in 12 years. I will not cook meal 145. The equipment and groceries belong to my business. I love this family, but love is not a reason to disappear." I placed the letter beneath the salt shaker, packed one suitcase, and walked out. The airport was quiet after midnight. When the plane lifted above Ohio, I switched off my phone and watched the lights disappear beneath the clouds. On Christmas Eve morning, Mom entered the kitchen and found empty shelves, an almost bare refrigerator, and my letter. She woke Dad. Within minutes, the entire house was in chaos. Dad demanded that Troy call me. Every call went to voicemail. Troy rushed to the supermarket, but the holiday delivery trucks had already come and gone. The local caterers laughed when he asked for Christmas service with 1 day's notice. By afternoon, he returned with 8 rotisserie chickens, frozen mashed potatoes, canned cranberry sauce, a plastic container of fruit salad, and 2 bakery pies. It cost him $382, the first meaningful amount he had spent on the household in years. Dad stared at the food. "That's not Christmas dinner." "It's the best I could do," Troy snapped. Dad shook his head. "Your sister could have done it in 3 hours." The silence that followed was the first crack in their alliance. On Christmas morning, Troy covered folding tables with bed sheets and set out paper plates. The house smelled of reheated chicken and panic. His friends arrived expecting the elegant feast he had promised. Their smiles faded when they saw canned cranberry sauce and grocery store pies still inside plastic containers. Then Melanie arrived with her parents. She looked at the table and whispered, "I thought your sister was cooking." "She had an emergency." Troy lied. Aunt Ruth arrived at noon carrying a tin of butter cookies. She hugged Mom, sat beside the window, and quietly watched Troy struggle to carve a chicken. At 1 o'clock, one of the guests saw a photograph I had posted online. It showed my hand holding a cup of coffee with the Pacific Ocean behind it. The caption read, "Merry Christmas from Maui. This is the first holiday in 12 years I have in someone else's kitchen." The image reached Melanie within minutes. She showed Troy her phone. "You said Simone had an emergency." Troy's face went pale. Melanie's father read my caption aloud. The room became so quiet that everyone could hear the furnace switch on. Dad stepped forward. "She's being dramatic. She always." Aunt Ruth set down her coffee cup. "Stop, Ray." She stood and faced the guests. "Simone has cooked every Christmas dinner for this family since she was 19. Before her, my mother June did it for 36 years. Ruth took a photograph of Grandma's ledger from her purse and placed it on the table. "Our mother recorded every holiday meal she prepared. 187 meals. At the bottom, she wrote, no one ever asked how much." Simone found this ledger 2 days ago. She decided she would not become the next entry. Dad's neck reddened. "This is a family matter. It stopped being private when you invited 25 strangers to eat food your daughter was ordered to cook for free." Ruth replied. She gestured toward the table. "This is what your family looks like without Simone's invisible work." Then Ruth revealed the rest. She told everyone about the $14,000 tax payment, the furnace, and the roof. She explained that I had spent $31,800 saving the same house Troy claimed he was providing as his contribution. Troy stared at her. "I didn't know." "That is the point," Ruth said. "You never asked. You never had to?" Melanie's father placed his napkin on the table and stood. Melanie looked at Troy with an expression he could not avoid. "I can't be with a man who treats his sister like unpaid help," she said. Then she and her parents left. Other guests collected their coats and followed. Some apologized to Mom. Others simply walked out in embarrassed silence. Dad slammed his hands on the table. "You came into my house to humiliate me." Ruth did not flinch. "This house was 60 days away from being sold at auction. Simone made sure you still had a door to slam." Mom had been silent throughout the confrontation. Now she removed my letter from her apron pocket and pushed it toward Dad. He read the final sentence again. "Love is not a reason to disappear." By 2 o'clock, the 25 guests were gone. Troy sat on the basement stairs staring at the floor. Dad remained at the table with my letter in front of him. On a beach in Maui, I watched the sunset turn the ocean copper and pink. No one was waiting for me to serve dessert, clear plates, or wash dishes. I opened Grandma's notebook to the first blank page and wrote, "Christmas. 0 guests. 0 meals." First time. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply allowed them to see what their lives looked like without my labor, holding everything together. The consequences came quickly. Melanie ended her relationship with Troy. Word of the Christmas disaster spread through Hopewell. For the first time, people knew who had paid to save my parents' house, and who had spent 12 years feeding everyone inside it. Dad did not call me. A man who had never learned to say thank you could not suddenly find the words for an apology. Mom called a week later. "I should have protected you," she said. "I should have spoken years ago." I did not tell her it was fine, because it was not. I simply answered, "I know, Mom." 2 months later, we met at a diner. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $2,000. "Troy wrote it," she said. "He has been taking extra shifts. It isn't everything, but it's a beginning." It was nowhere near what he owed. But for the first time, my brother had done something that required effort instead of expecting mine. "And Dad?" I asked. Mom looked down at her coffee. "Isn't ready. When he is, he knows where to find me." The Brandt kitchen grew after that Christmas. Several guests who had witnessed the confrontation contacted Nora and me for catering quotes. People who had watched me cook for free finally began asking what my work was worth. I still cook. I still love the smell of butter browning in a pan and cinnamon warming in the oven. But now I decide when, where, and for whom I cook. The kitchen was never the prison. The belief that I could not leave was. My grandmother counted every meal because no one else valued her labor. My mother endured because she believed love meant endless sacrifice. I chose something different. I learned that the people who truly love you will still love you when you stop serving them. And the people who only love what you do for them will reveal themselves the moment you say no. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can bring to the family table is nothing at all.